Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for this week's law series. It's 3 o'clock and we should ideally start at 3. But we'd like to give our guests a couple more minutes and we'll start in about 5 minutes. So please hold on and bear with us. Thank you very much. It's a series on this topic, right? So whatever questions we don't address today, we'll address in the Twitter live series taking place next week, Saturday at 7 p.m. But details of that event will go out shortly after this. Now, that's the first. So that's the second point. And also, please, we know you would like to get your CPD points. Now, there's a link in the chat for you to fill up, to a form for you to fill up, where you can register for your points, and we'll take it from there. Without further ado, thank you once again. Thank you to the council members that are joining us, and thank you to our distinguished guests, and especially our panelists. We'd like to start by introducing our first panelist, who actually, to most of us, doesn't need an introduction. But this, just in case you do need to, he needs an introduction. His name is Mr. Basil Udotai. Now, Basil, am I going too fast? Moses, can you please put up his... Hello. Yes. So Mr. Udotai is the managing partner of Technology Advisors and lead consultant. He is also the immediate past director and pioneer head of the Directorate for Cybersecurity Office of the National Security Advisor, NSA. So you see that Mr. Udotai is definitely more than very well qualified to speak on this issue. Right? And before then, Mr. Udotai was the key coordinator in the Nigerian Cybercrime Working Group, where he spent a couple of years elaborating and, putting all the pieces together. Basil Udotai, thank you very much for joining us today. Hi, Basil, can you hear me? You seem to be having technical difficulties. You're on mute. Basil, you're mute.
It says the host needs to unmute me.
Oh, apologies.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And just in case, to anybody that doesn't know, Basil Udotai was also is also a past chair of the ICT Committee of the section of Business Law. So thank you so much for coming back and for your dedication to ICT growth in Nigeria. Now, we have Mr. Oshoke. Yes, Mr. Oshoke Ojo. Now, Mr. Oshoke Ojo is the co-founder of Covenda, which is a cyber security outfit, and he's a board advisor to RegTech Africa, a regulatory and technology media company. Mr. Oshoke was invited and he willingly agreed to attend today's meeting. And his insights as someone that works in the industry, I think we're all going to find it very beneficial and very helpful to us, particularly tech lawyers or lawyers that want to go into this space. So thank you, Mr. Ojo, for agreeing to come today.
Thank you, Khadija. Glad to be here.
And finally, our final panelist is Colonel Bala Fakandu. Now, Colonel Bala, as the name says, is a military man and is a cybersecurity expert. He is also the Deputy Director of Communications at the Office of the National Security Advisor and the Manager, Computer Emergency Response Team, that's the NGCERT. Now, unfortunately, Colonel Bala Fakandu is being held up, so he's not going to, he will be joining us sometime during this, this webinar. So we'll give him a proper introduction at the time. But to avoid any further delays, right, we would like to go straight into the topic at hand. Basil, if I may, I would like to start with you.
Sure.
Just a second. Now, we keep talking cybercrime. In 2015, we had the Cybercrime bill that was finally enacted into law. Now, that law, it was lauded and it was criticized, perhaps in equal measure. What are your thoughts on that law? And do you think it adequately addresses cybercrime and cybersecurity issues in Nigeria?
All right. Thank you very much, Khadija. And it's always a pleasure to come back to SBL. And I'm glad that not only are we continuing this tradition of providing excellent and quality training and capacity building for our lawyers, we're also beginning to zero down on very niche areas. So thanks a lot for having me join and contribute my little quota on this. Now, I don't know how much of the history of the Cybercrime Act we're aware of, but the very first draft of a cybercrime law in Nigeria or bill was in 2004. And from 2004 up to 2010, we had close to 10, if not 11 iterations of the bill sponsored by various stakeholders. Majority came from members of the House and Senate via private member bill. And the only version that came from government was the one that we produced from the Office of the NSA. For some reasons, the bill did not secure legislative assent. In fact, we didn't even get to the point where we could have taken it to the government, the president for his signature. And you understand, within this period too, we'd had a number of political changes. So, you know, membership changes in change in some of the committees and so on and so forth. Now, this period of time, unfortunately, we're not also able to isolate Nigeria's economy from the changes around tech. So things were also happening. And in fact, a commentator once took me outside at one of those public hearings and said, look, Basil, the law you guys are trying to enact, you know, already expired in terms of substantive provisions like 5-6 years ago. Now, at the end of the day, the National Security Advisor that was appointed, I think 2010 or so, now empaneled the Harmonization Committee and asked all the various versions of the bill to be brought together under a single umbrella. And that was the committee that produced the bill that survived. But even then, that bill also had residues from all these other competing laws or draft laws that were all over the House and the Senate. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the cybercrime law very well, you're going to see some aspects that are very transactional. You're going to see aspects that deal exclusively on financial sector or financial issues. And then you're also going to see those generic cybercrime provisions. So not that we were not aware or did not see these lapses. because we had so much going on and not a single provision in a law that prohibited any undesirable action online in the form of a crime, it was allowed to go as a baby steps approach towards having some kind of legislation in place. Now, the question now is, having gotten to where we are now, what should be the policy going forward? What sort of law should we put in place to cater for cybercrime and cybersecurity? And there are a few questions. One of the key questions is to see whether there's a need to combine a single legal framework to cater for cybercrime and cybersecurity at the same time. The other issue is whether we should continue with that philosophy of baby steps approach even for cybersecurity, meaning there are institutions that are created by laws around the world. If you look at the US as an example, you see a recent law in 2018 that was enacted under President Trump's presidency called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Act. That law provided a very comprehensive capacity for this agency embedded under the Department of Homeland Security. In fact, its budget for 2020 was about $3.6 billion. And amongst other strategies, they created room for certification, created rooms for standardization, created rooms for information sharing protocols between private sector and government. So a lot of comprehensive work being done. So if we were to insist on a more sophisticated cybersecurity framework in Nigeria, we have to take the same approach. Are we going to have a law that maybe create institutions to help us with standardization of protocols around cybersecurity? Are we going to create a law that, sort of create an agency that will help with critical information infrastructure protection? Or should we forget about cybersecurity and focus on cybercrime in this law and begin to work on a different framework, a more comprehensive framework for cybersecurity? These are questions that for stakeholders to take. And of course, the Office of the National Security Advisor has started a process of stakeholder engagement for almost a year now. I understand even the NBA was contacted, and our position as a legal community was communicated to the NSA. They did that with the Nigerian Computer Society, as I understand as well, with ARTCON that handles telecoms, and so on and so forth. So all these stakeholder positions are going to be looked at, and at the end of the day, what would emerge should be a position from around professional entities connected to cybersecurity, and we'll now begin to get a sense of what the industry is demanding of government. And hopefully the process for initially coming up with a draft would commence. We'll have that draft put out for public comment. And of course, the normal legislative process will take hold, where at the end of the day, what would be required for our economy would emerge. Whether we've gotten to that level of sophistication where we need a different framework of cybersecurity, I think this process would determine, or whether we should also continue to combine cybercrime and cybersecurity framework, we would also determine at the time. My issue usually with legal drafting, as far as legislative process is concerned in Nigeria, is that we don't take a very deliberate attitude towards it. So we don't allow our laws to be a true reflection of our economy and the characters of the economy that we're trying to. Khadija, I see you shaking your head. I hope I'm not taking too much time. Please, if I do, please stop me at any point, please.
No, you are. And honestly, the points you've raised are so important. And I think that those are issues that we are going to delve into more at the Q&A section, and also at the Twitter live series. And I'll be more than happy if you could join us for that. But hold that thought, Basil. Let's go to Oshoke. Now, Oshoke, you're a businessman, right? You're not a lawyer, and you're not a security agent, in the sense that you're not military trained. Now, as a cybersecurity professional, and as one who has extensive experience working in the private sector, what would you say is your reaction, or how would you describe the attitude or the response from corporate organizations in Nigeria? I mean, how do you think they see it? Would you, in your view, do they see cybersecurity as a strategic threat to business operations? Are they prepared to address these threats within their organizations? And are they making enough investments in cybersecurity and risk management?
So, Khadija, thanks. I was also shaking my head too as well on the points Bessel was making, because he was hitting just so many notes that I would love to chime in on later on. But to address your question directly, let me just take a step back. So I have actually worked in the government sector in the US as well, in the defense and intelligence sector, worked one of the largest defense contractors in the US. And so from that background, and it's from that I moved straight into, to Nigeria and the fintech space, risk management and cybersecurity. So I got a bit of a shock, right, in terms of my background experience and what I saw in the US private sector, in the intelligence sector, and what I was seeing in Nigeria, in the fintech space to date, right?
Wow.
Do businesses take cybersecurity seriously? Short answer is yes, right? I think the question is, how serious do they take it, right? And in the grand scheme of things, if I'm a bank CEO, or if I'm the CEO of a telco, right? When I'm thinking about all the barriers to the financial rewards, the customer rewards that I want to attain, based on what my board of directors will compensate me or will reward me, where does cybersecurity rank, right, in the minds of of those individuals? Now, the reality is that it is hot, it's current, it's fresh to say, oh yes, cybersecurity is high on my on the agenda. But I think we really need to look to assess what is organizations or CEOs, how they take cybersecurity is follow the money, right? Look at where the investments are being made in the organization. What's the investment being made in people in cybersecurity, in people in risk management, in people in compliance, versus the investment being made in people in other areas of the organization, whether it is sales, marketing, finance, product development, the other kinds of IT engineering. And there you really find your answer, right? So it will be somewhat arrogant or unfortunately unnecessarily controversial for me to say that I think this is what boards are doing. But I also go ahead and say that, right? I will say from some industry insights that the boards do take cybersecurity seriously, right? However, there is the sense that once I've hired a chief information security officer, or I have a chief risk officer, then it's done and dusted, right? And so you don't have that sustained finger on the pulse on what's happening at the board level when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, there are regulations, kind of alluding to what, taking on from what Basu was saying earlier, there are some industry-specific regulations. So, for example, in the banking, payments, fintech space, CBN in 2018 came up with the a risk-based cybersecurity framework, right? That mandated that fintechs, banks should have a chief information security officer, like they had done previously across the banking sector for chief compliance officers, right? And so with that, we will want to, hit our chest and say, oh yes, it's being taken very seriously at the board level because there's a regulation that the regulator has put in place. But the reality is that the business operations, the experience with customers do not reflect that. So if we understand that cybersecurity or the larger information security is that intersection of the confidentiality of our information, the integrity of whatever business process we have with data, and availability of systems, of business processes, of people. When we understand cybersecurity in that scope, we then begin to realize that some operational problems we experience, like downtimes, right? So for example, I can't log into my my banking app, right? Or when I want to upload a new PHCN code to get more power credits, right? It doesn't work. The system is down. right? That's also a cybersecurity concern, right? Because it borders on availability. When we begin to look at it from that much broader and also more authentic perspective, we then realize that, yeah, it probably doesn't have the right kind of focus that it needs to have. Some things have been done, a lot more needs to be done when we begin to look at the operational realities of these organizations. Let me also add that at the board perspective, the focus seems to be more about compliance. Is there a rule, and am I following the rule, right? Am I shown or seen to be following the rule versus the actual reality of that? Are my systems protected? Are my people informed and aware of what their roles and responsibilities are, in cybersecurity? Simply having a CISO and checking that box, is that CISO at the right level of expertise and knowledge and hands-on operational capabilities to be able to truly give the CEO the comfort to just sleep at night? I'd say the answer is no.
Oh, wow. So in short, in terms of checking the box, right, all is in order. But in terms systems and companies need to go a step further and be sure that, that security they are providing, the cybersecurity holds up, right? And it has to be really stringent. Thank you for clarifying that, and thank you for mentioning your previous past life experience in the US. I think my colleague Moses has a couple of follow-on questions. Moses?
Okay, yes. So thank you very much, Ushoke and Basil. Thank you. But before we get back to Basil, I think just to follow up on Ushoke's response, I think it would be interesting to know, to ask that what kind of conversations should corporate, let me say, CEOs be having with general counsels or external counsel or CISO, CIOs in order to create a more realistic and integrated picture of an organization exposure to cyber threats? We would like to have your opinion and view on this.
The fact that question even exists at all is a starting point, because currently CEOs and boards are not having these conversations with the general counsel, right? The general counsel is looked at more like, are we facing litigation, or is there some new law I have to deal with, or company registration, whatever, right? They're not really brought into the conversation that has to do with cybersecurity. At the same time, general counsels themselves they tend to see cybersecurity as a tech issue, as a tech problem. So that's for the CIO, for the CTO, right? So they themselves are not leaning in as much as they should and intersecting themselves in these conversations in the boardrooms, in the CEO's office, right? Beyond just what regulations your regulator has and the fact that there are elements of a contract that that creates, and I want to engage my general counsel on that. What I need to also be engaging my general counsel on is when we look at these regulations or these standards, if we begin to treat cybersecurity procedures or cybersecurity standards and guidelines and regulations as a contract, which is what they really are, except for, in many cases, it's a kind of loose contract between the organization and its customer base, or the organization and the larger society, if it's a case of an act, right? So if general counsels begin to look at standards as a kind of contract of sorts, right? Or, a social contract, if you will, what they will then begin to find is that there are areas of cybersecurity, upwards to 75%, that has nothing to do with technology. These are things that people must do. And right at the back, you can see, okay, that's probably something that I want my GC to be involved in, right? Because people are involved in that. If we go into further, both in the area of privacy and also pure play cybersecurity, what you also find is that there are responsibilities on what people need to do, right? That essentially establishes a kind of agreement where you need a kind of mutual internal agreement amongst your various stakeholders. These are conversations that general counsel need to be a part of, right? On the external front, I would say that as general counsels begin to understand what the various threats their businesses face, right? And understanding what risk these represent. One of the response to risk is not just what new toy do I buy, right? Or what new consultant do I hire? It's also what kind of insurance do I take? How do I pass this, when I see my company has done the best that it can do, or the best that it's willing to do, what's left, right? So the risk is left. How do I transfer that onto somebody else who will manage that for me? In the form of insurance, for example, right? These are conversations that GCs need to be having. But again, I will put the onus on GCs and less on the board and the CEO to say that general counsels need to be injecting themselves into these conversations, right? They need to be, I always joke with my brother Basil that you go into Basil's office and on his shelf, he has a book on TCP/IP, and I wonder what's a lawyer doing with a book about TCP/IP, right? These are things that general counsels that work for tech companies, for companies where a good portion of their revenue is exercised using technology. So I mean, not necessarily just a tech company, but I could be in, banking business, or I could be in even fashion, right? To the extent that technology is used in me being able to create my products and deliver services, to that extent, general counsels need to be integrating themselves in the cybersecurity conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this. And I think very insightful, enlightening. Yes, so just before we get back to you on the follow-up questions, but back to Basil. I know that, yes, there is this argument between cybercrime and what is cybercrime, what is cybersecurity, whether it's an academic argument or not. But I think we would like to know, in your own view, is there a convergence between cybercrime, cybersecurity, and we would like to have your thoughts on this. If you could shed more light on this.
All right. Thank you very much, Moses. I usually try to stay away from definitional or academic discussions. I prefer practical issues, but since we are trying to educate our stakeholders here and our community, it's important for us to at least take a look at what the constituent areas are for, let's take cybersecurity, for instance. Now, cybersecurity is an offshoot of computer security, and it maintains what is called the CIA triad. C represents confidentiality, I represents integrity, and A represents availability. And right after 9/11, there's another element that's been added to cybersecurity, and it's called critical information infrastructure protection. Now, if you look at these 4 elements that make up cybersecurity, you're going to see that it is generic to subject matter. There's nothing about crime. There's nothing about insurance. There's nothing about anything. So it's just generic. Now, for you to be able to attain cybersecurity, there's other areas that you must activate. The one area that is very, very important is that anybody that conducts any undesirable action online that would affect any of the CIA or CIIP must somehow find themselves being implicated by a law. Now, what is the nature of that law? If you want to be coercive, you want to be preventive in terms of, what kind of conduct you are regulating in, as a law, what would you want to do? Many jurisdictions have, opted to impose a criminal liability on those kinds of actions. That's where cybercrime comes in. So as a constitutional democracy, nobody commits a crime in Nigeria except he has carried out a conduct that is prohibited in a written law in which a punishment is also prescribed. So that's the gap we had up until 2015, because though everybody shouted and cried over all kinds of things that went on online, we did not have a single line of legislation that said this constituted a crime to meet the constitutional requirement that would, enable investigation, enable any kind of law enforcement action, not to mention prosecution, right? Now, so if the idea is to make sure that cybersecurity is maintained so that we can get all the promises that technology has made to us as humans, then you have to integrate a system where unlawful activities that will impinge on these elements are somehow mitigated or managed, right? Now, the challenge I have when we begin to compare cybercrime and cybersecurity and all of that is that people forget that cybersecurity itself is an ecosystem. Cybersecurity cannot be compared to any of the subsets. You can't compare cybersecurity to privacy, for instance, or data protection. But cybersecurity is that all-encompassing umbrella where all of these come under. For instance, I already started by saying that the stipulations are generic in nature. But if you come down, there are also sector-specific requirements for cybersecurity. So if you go to the financial sector, there are requirements for cybersecurity, health sector, energy, transportation, and so on and so forth. So all the sectors have their own specific requirements. Health, for instance, if you look at the National Health Act, that was enacted, I think, 2014 in Nigeria, if you look at from section 28 down, you're going to see provisions that look like our data protection law. You're going to see provisions that look like our cybercrime law. You're going to see provisions that look like our cybersecurity law. You know, so this is what the Health Act has decided to do for the health industry in relation to health information. You know, and then beyond that, there's also the substantive areas of law that must cater to cybersecurity. We've talked about criminal law. There's also contract. Oshoke talked about how you can see industry stipulation as being contractual in nature. There's also all this information sharing agreements. You know, our compliance environment is not yet extremely sophisticated. Otherwise, when you do breach notification, so say the computer emergency response team of the NSA, there are supposed to be protocol for handing over that information. Who is the person handing over that information? What kind of control does the person have over the information system that's been breached? You know, those kinds of negotiations, those kinds of agreements, who is at the forefront of you know, or managing this relationship? These are things that are proper conversation or proper content of a typical cybersecurity law. Then there's intellectual property rights. There's the whole entertainment. There's insurance. Cybersecurity insurance is now a big deal. There's international law. When Hush Puppy committed this crime and he was arrested in Dubai, this is a Nigerian citizen and was arrested in, you know, where he resided, you know, in conjunction with a third country. Nigeria was not even involved. You know, so what should the proper legal position be for Nigeria, for instance? Because this guy is a Nigerian citizen, even though, you know, he resided abroad and has committed a crime under US law. You know, so there are a whole lot of issues. And then what should a lawyer do? Then if you begin to look at that, you're going to see so many areas as well. There's policy to discuss, there's law, there are regulations, there are transactions, there's even litigation, you know. So a lawyer that is coming into cybersecurity space cannot be limiting himself or be seeing cybersecurity as something you want to compare to data security, data protection, for instance. You have to see it as this, you know, all-encompassing, very forward-looking area of law practice where you have to look at your client's exposure in tech space in a more universal sense. So you begin to identify the sort of risk, you know, that you are thinking to use legal tools to mitigate, and the kind of intervention you will seek from the regulators to support. Because, you know, at the end of the day, if you look at our market, you see that
Sorry,
we're
Mr.
still a
B,
growing
you have 30 seconds. Please. We would like to introduce the Colonel. The Colonel is in now.
All right. Yeah. So Fire. I hope you get a sense that we cannot compare a soup that is well made with any condiment in the soup, right? So you know, so cybersecurity is an umbrella that has crime, has privacy, has, you know, every other element, and that's how a lawyer should look at it, so they can have a more comprehensive attitude towards growing your skill in this space. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Basil. Yeah, Khadija, over to you.
Thank you so much. And I think there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. But before we go any further, we need to bring up the Colonel. Colonel Fakandu, PhD. Thank you for joining us. And we know you're very busy and we know you're not even in town. And but you made a commitment and you're honoring that commitment. So before you joined us, I was going to introduce you, except I felt it would be best for you to come on and we can have a discussion with you. So as I was saying earlier, Colonel Fakandu, PhD, is the Deputy Director of Communications at the Office of the National Security Advisor and the Manager Computer Emergency Response Team, NGSET. Now, that means obviously Colonel Fakandu is a military man, but apart from having such a distinguished military career, Colonel Fakandu focuses really on cybersecurity, security, and obviously cybersecurity and cybercrime. So we're happy to have you here. And we're happy to have you here, first of all, but being that we've been on since 3 o'clock, we're going to pause our regular programming and go straight into your questions. So thank you, Colonel Fakandu, for joining us today. You might have, Moses, you might have to unmute him.
Okay, I think he's off, but I think let's continue once he's back. I believe he's off. Yes.
Yeah, because he anyway, we'll get to it when it comes in. But we have some very, very, very interesting insights from the Colonel, from a cybersecurity military expert, right? So I think this question really, we've sort of addressed it, but it will be good to have to go into it deeper, right? Oshoke talked earlier about what general counsels should do and how they should be more forward approaching in terms of the issue of cybersecurity versus the board thinking, okay, perhaps we should bring in legal, right? But this question, I think, is more for the both of you, i.e., Mr. Basil Udotai and Oshoke himself, right? We would like to hear from you both. What nuggets would you like to share with lawyers seeking to participate in this field of cybersecurity and cybercrime? And I think, Oshoke, also for you, what would you like to see? Because, you know, I think what's so unique about our panelists today is that Basil is a lawyer, we are lawyers, I am in the midst of lawyers. So it would be good to hear from you, Oshoke, what you would like as a businessman and as one that is looking in to the legal profession, what you would like young lawyers or any lawyer seeking to participate in this field to know. So I think we'll take it from you, Oshoke, and then we'll go on to Basil.
Sure. So I've had the privilege or the error of having been responsible for the legal department of a major fintech. And you know, oftentimes I think I spent too much time reviewing contracts to the point where, you know, someone has said to me, you might as well have just gone to law school, right? That said, I do appreciate this audience. And what comes to mind right away is some of the advice I would give to members of in-house legal counsel who reported to me through head of legal. And I would always say that whenever we're thinking about, first things first, right? And there's a question, you know, the Q&A or a comment that I also will intertwine in my response here. We must recognize that we don't do cybersecurity for its own sake, right? The point of cybersecurity is not for cybersecurity, right? It is for the sake of the business, you know, the organization, a product, the nation, right? It's to protect an asset of value or information of value, right? In addition, if we think of cybersecurity in that perspective, right, that it's not just about for its own sake, then it's not a matter of what are we protecting against from, right? It's some threat, and threats can be generic, right? It's just any circumstance that's adverse to, you know, any adverse circumstance. One person's meat could be another person's poison, right? So my threat or my risk could be someone else's reward. Now, in this space of cybersecurity, there are cyber threats, right? Or there are threats to our cybersecurity. There are threats to confidentiality, threats to integrity, threats to the availability of information and systems, right? So from that perspective, we can now then recognize that cybersecurity doesn't exist in the vacuum of its own. it must exist in the space of the larger enterprise risk management, right? How do we manage risk for an enterprise, for an organization, for a business, for a country, for a department, right? Or for a system, right? So it's in that regard that lawyers should be thinking about cybersecurity. If we move our mind away from just the systems we're protecting, but then why are we doing this? We now then begin to recognize that cybersecurity then becomes a tool that a lawyer can use in performing their work. Here's one lovely example I've used many times with legal departments. It's to say, yes, there is a regulation or a law that says XYZ must be done. It's something else to reduce that into an organization's own internal policies. Yes, ignorance of the law is not an excuse, but nonetheless, it shows due diligence within the organization when we codify in our internal organizational policies, whatever these policies are, we codify, we recognize the existence of this law and our intent, management's intent to comply with the law, right? Or to comply with the regulation. It then even goes further that in contracts we may issue to our affiliates, business partners, to customers, right? That those elements of cybersecurity law, regulation, or standard that apply to those specific cases or instances should be reduced in writing. So oftentimes, if I'm engaging a third-party service provider, I will have a security annex to the contract. And in that security annex, we would have done the work, myself and legal. In fact, this is actually giving me some nostalgia of some time I spent, at InterSwitch with our head of legal, where we would literally scour through various cybersecurity standards that existed, at the time and still do exist, and look for those specific safeguards and countermeasures that apply to this specific business case and reduce that in writing into that contract. Because it's one thing to say, oh, yes, I pledge to comply with XYZ regulation or, Cybercrime Act or risk-based cybersecurity framework. It's another thing for the specific safeguards and countermeasures that this regulation or standard calls for to be explicitly included in the contract. Because what now then does is internally it creates due diligence. For the customer, what we're doing is being transparent on what we expect, right? So, but again, that is impossible if GCs, if in-house counsel are not as knowledgeable of cybersecurity regulation and standards as law as they are about other kinds of law that they need to factor into their work. So that was specific case, this security annex that could be an addendum. And again, it's not going to be a generic template you apply to every single contract, right? It's going to be that for this specific business case or a specific product or specific client, the specific cybersecurity safeguards and countermeasures that are required are reduced in writing into that contract. Again, what that also does on the receiving end, it puts their GC on notice that, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to deal with protecting our information as a matter of just IT. We're elevating this to the responsibility of the legal. Hey, legal on the other end, be in touch with this, be aware of this. They also now then act as an advocate internally when you're doing contract review to ensure that, okay, well, are we complying or abiding by all the terms and conditions of the contract? Because we made that reduction into the contract, it now then allows them the opportunity to be able to make that assessment.
Sheka, I think we've lost you a bit, but thanks. Actually, we got. I think I'm having an issue with my connection. Just bear with me a second.
No, we can hear you, Khadija.
Okay,
Okay, I can hear you guys too.
Right. Okay. Colonel Fakandu, thank you very much for joining us again. And I think, Mr. Basu, please hold on a second. We'll just come back to you, and we'll take a couple of questions. We'll ask a couple of questions of the Colonel, and then we'll come back to you. Colonel Fakandu. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
So thank you very much for joining us. Now, earlier on today, we had heard from the other speakers and panelists on the convergence between cybercrime and cybersecurity. But now I would like to ask you specifically whether, in your view, whether there's been a convergence between privacy and cybersecurity, because it seems like both areas are converging. Now, what is the potential impact on the regulatory landscape, regulatory and compliance landscape in this regard?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I'm sorry for joining late because the meeting I'm having in London was running late, so I had to move out of the meeting to join earlier, and I went off because of the network where I am. There's actually convergence between cybersecurity and cybercrime. If you look at it from a more holistic point, cybersecurity is more broader, and cybercrime is just a key component part of cybercrime is just a key component part of cybersecurity. Now, cybersecurity has a whole lot in it. You have the governance part of it. You have the legal part of it. You have the technical part of it. You have the advocacy part of it. Meanwhile, cybercrime is a crime. Cybercrime is just a crime, but it's a key component. Security is a key component of the security aspect of cybersecurity. I mean, as a whole. Now, in terms of regulatory and compliance regime in Nigeria, we've actually done a lot, and I'm happy that Mr. Basil gave a lowdown of a historical perspective of where we are coming from and where we are at this point, and the key issues that we should be discussing or considering as lawyers. Now, the whole hallmark of cybersecurity is the legal part of it. We need to understand that the legal framework that backs our engagement in the country as a whole is the Cybercrime Act. It actually facilitates how it actually codified criminality in the cyberspace and gives us the foundation to do our businesses as far as cybersecurity is concerned. That's one. And, going down the lane from the historical perspective, we've done a lot in ensuring compliance and, the cybersecurity governance. We've developed frameworks, deliberate frameworks in terms of, from the legal framework as well, in terms of national cybersecurity policy and strategy. And we rolled out some institutional framework that are captured in the act and the strategy itself to ensure that things are done the right way to ensure compliance of the act as well. Quite a number of areas with critical information infrastructure protection. These are the different areas you have to deal with. Now, somebody talked about risk management, something like confidentiality, and quite a number of areas. These are little aspects of cybersecurity as a whole that we need to consider if we're moving forward, especially if we're in terms of compliance and regime. Now, it is important for the lawyers to understand the technical bit of cybersecurity as well. Now, we have a challenge, especially in ensuring administratability of and administering justice in cybersecurity, because the lawyers do not understand the technical bit in employing in carrying out their job, the lawyers and this thing. So there's a huge gap in terms of understanding what cybersecurity is, in terms of understanding how the digital evidences are presented and what they entail. So those are the huge challenges that we need to understand. Apart from the governance framework itself, we need to also have capacity in delivering justice, because most of the times, even understanding how these digital evidences are presented or are even extracted is a huge challenge for the lawyers. And as part of the compliance regime, we actually developed some mechanism to ensure we build capacity for lawyers as well. Today, we just discussed quite a range of areas in bilateral discussion with the UK government. We talked about quite a number of issues, including capacity building for judges, development of establishment of digital forensic laboratory for the judiciary sector. Why? Because they need to have those kind of things to understand, so that they will have some technical competence within the judiciary to assist them in understanding, how to administer justice on the issue of cybersecurity. So these are
Right.
a whole range of issues around
Mhm.
cybersecurity and cybercrime that I just needed to put in perspective
Okay.
so that at least we have understanding. If there are questions, specific questions, I think I'm more than happy to answer.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad you touched on some of the things that you did. So to our audience, thank you, but we'll crave your indulgence just for a few minutes. The Colonel just joined, and as you can see, he has a very busy schedule. So we'd just like to get as much information out of him before he goes back into his meeting. Now, Colonel, it's important for me to ask you this. We had the implementation of the Cybercrime Act of 2015. We're looking to amend that act, right?
Yes.
Now, in terms of the proposed amendments, do you think that there is a need for another agency, or is the Cybercrime Advisory Council adequate to implement the issues of cybercrime in Nigeria? How can we ensure that there's proper implementation? How do we address proper implementation in this regard? Okay,
thank you very much. What you're talking about is governance issue, and I'm happy to discuss that. Now, the key thing you need to understand, the Office of National Security has been doing the work of implementation and coordination. Implementation is drilling down to the MDAs and those that have responsibilities. However, the office has been doing all that. Now, we reviewed the strategy last year, and as part of the framework of the strategy, we have the operationalization of the National Cybersecurity Coordination Center, and that's the overarching body that is responsible for ensuring the coordination of cybersecurity and cybercrime in Nigeria. Now, bearing in mind that the strategy was just launched last year, and part of the responsibility of the Office of National Security Advisor is to ensure the full implementation of that strategy itself. And there are quite a number of agencies that have stakeholders have responsibilities within the implementation action plan to ensure implementation of the strategy itself. Now, the coordination center has different components, and all the different components have different responsibility in ensuring that all the aspects of cybersecurity are fully implemented. Now, so far, we've requested for the approval to implement to operationalize the coordination center since last year, April. We've had 2 or 3 reminders, Mr. President, and as I'm talking to you, anytime soon, we shall have the approval from Mr. President and we implement. I'm talking about in 2 months or 3 or less than that, because there's no fixed time, but I'm telling you that as soon as that is approved, it's going to be operationalized. Once that is done, you will see more coordination, more activities, and quite a number of agencies that have relevant roles in cybersecurity will have a connection, and they will have ability to make sure we facilitate the coordination across board. Now, the amendment of the strategy is actually going to be holistic. Why? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Colonel.
Yeah, the amendment of the strategy is going to be holistic. It took us time to actually get input from stakeholders across board since last year, November. And we have input from various stakeholders, and there are quite a number of changes that we need to make. There are a lot of new technologies that have come on board in terms of virtual currency, virtual assets, and all that. There are vital input from stakeholders, and also we've observed over time some areas that do not actually matter these days. So we need to review and ensure that all these different inputs and areas that are inconsistent with our present reality are actually amended and carry everybody along. And the principle in our activities in terms of coordination and also the amendment of society is the whole of society approach, and that's what cybersecurity inherits, so that everybody has a stake, everybody has a voice in the whole business, and everybody has a responsibility. So the lawyers have their responsibility. If they look at the act very well and look at the strategy, the act very well, or the amendment of the act, they will realize that they have a responsibility one way or the other to make input, to also make to facilitate the national interest and national agenda as far as cybersecurity is concerned. I don't know if I've made a point. If there are specific questions, and I'm more than ready to answer. Thank you.
No, that was definitely very insightful, and at least it gives us an idea into how what we should expect in terms of the operationality of the cybercrime and in terms of the agencies. So there's a lot of coordination going on, but the process still needs to put a few pieces together. That is definitely very helpful. Now, I think what I'm going to make the last question for you, because I know you have to go really, is to discuss the cybersecurity policy of 2014. Now, as far as I'm aware, the Nigeria's first cybersecurity policy document was in 2014. But that's my knowledge, right? Last year, this policy was reviewed and it was updated, right? As far as I'm aware, it was updated in the National Cybersecurity Policy and Strategy document that was published. I don't know.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
So I was talking about the policy, the cybersecurity policy of 2014 and how it was updated 2021. Now, it's been some time since this update. And I would like to know how would you rate the acceptance of this policy, the acceptance and the implementation, and really why was it necessary to update this policy? True, time had elapsed, but why was it necessary to update it? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Great. So why was it necessary?
Yeah, I didn't get your question.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat it for you. Why was it necessary to update this policy, right? And has it made a difference? How has the acceptance rate of this policy been? Has it been widely accepted? What are your thoughts on this? Hello? Let me see if we've lost him. Nope, he's still here. Colonel, can you hear me? Hello?
I think he might be having.
I think he's having technical issues.
Yes.
Yeah, I think he's dropped off. I think we've lost him. What a shame. Yes, but I think the Colonel gave us some very insightful information in terms of cybersecurity and what, as you know, from a military or a coordinating perspective, what has been taking place in that space. If we get him back, we will ask. But I also note that this is 4:03. Thank you to our guests that are still with us, but we'll need to start. I'm sure we're going to have to wrap up very soon. And in that sense, I think we'll just take a couple of questions. But remember, any question we do not address in this meeting will be addressed in our Twitter live series next week, Saturday, right? So without further ado, let's go into the Q&A space. Moses.
Yeah, okay, so before we go into, I think Basil is here to answer his question.
That's true.
Yeah, so Basil, please.
Sorry, what was the question again?
Okay, the question was generally, so for lawyers, okay, trying to have expertise.
Oh, I see.
In this
Lawyers who are trying to get into cybersecurity. I think I might have touched on that question by saying that lawyers should see this as an all-encompassing space. They shouldn't come from they shouldn't come from a limited point of view. I think Cornell is trying to come back.
I think he's having difficulty. Please proceed, Basil. We'll try and get in touch with him.
Yeah. All right.
Hello.
I don't see him.
I think Basil, you can continue.
Can someone send Cornell a message?
Yes.
So that we're having difficulties and So the challenge I have with our legal community in terms of the reform in capacity building is that we tend to take minute areas of law and focus on it as if it is the wholesome, the entire whole, the entirety, of the law. Right now, there's a lot of focus on data protection in the country. Everybody's just doing data protection, and it seems like that's where everybody's gravitating to. But if you have a sit down with any of these lawyers and go ask them, first of all, what area of law is data protection coming from? What are the procedure? What are the component areas? In this law, you're going to have a shock in the kind of information you're going to get from lawyers. So a lawyer that is interested in cybersecurity should first of all understand that cybersecurity is situating between all the values that technology promises and generates, and the extension of that values to customers. So in between that, there are a lot of risk, and that's what cybersecurity is, trying to deliver, trying to provide. So the whole issue around integrity, ensuring there's confidentiality, ensuring there's availability, ensuring there's critical information infrastructure protection, are all the elements that a lawyer needs to focus on. And from the point of view of like on a daily sort of activities, what sort of policies do you propose to your organization? I go to some offices and they simply just dish out their Wi-Fi password. If I'm waiting and the MD or the CEO is taking a bit of time, they just ask me to log on to their information system or their Wi-Fi, and continue to, maybe browse while I'm waiting for the boss. And in a number of cases, I've asked to see, look, do you have a demarcation between visitors coming in do you have a different information system, different Wi-Fi for visitors and the one that is corporate? And these things do not exist. So having a full understanding of the fact that your risk management competence as a lawyer today is what translates into your skill in cybersecurity, because there's an intersection between technology and almost every value creation and service provision in the world today. So that understanding is what will first of all give the lawyer the basic space to operate. And then from there, the next move is to see what area of law are you proceeding from. Some lawyers are put in corporate departments, some lawyers are in supporting sales, some lawyers are supporting corporate. So if you are doing corporate, so it means that the board responsibility in relation to cybersecurity is your forte. You have to, understand things like what percentage of budgeting is being allocated for cybersecurity, and there are standards, around the world too. Like Oshoka said earlier, how much money is being devoted to the security of your infrastructure, the privacy of your customers, the mitigation of risk in your organization. It goes to show, it speaks a lot about your capacity and your desire to manage the cybersecurity risk in your organization. So first of all, I think the main issue is the understanding of the various areas and the dedication to learn, and just follow through with what the trends are, as a lawyer.
Okay, thanks. Many thanks for that, Basil. I mean, that's definitely very helpful and very insightful. I know if I was looking to major in that area, I wasn't looking to major in that area, but I've taken down a lot of notes. Looking at the Q&A box, we really pretty much answered all the questions apart from the ones that only the Colonel can. So I think on that basis, we are going to wrap up and bring this meeting to a close. But to the people with their hands up, apologies, sincere apologies. There's a lot to discuss, but there just isn't the time for it today, right? But please, November 26th, 7 p.m., Twitter live series. The link is we're going to communicate further on that, but just bear that in mind. We will talk about that. We don't have any time limit. So we can talk about that as much as we would like, and we can take all the questions. So thank you so much. And most especially, thank you to our host, NBA-SBL. Thank you to our distinguished panelists, Oshoke Ojo, Mr. Basilu Dutai, and of course, the Colonel Fakandu, PhD. And to our distinguished guests, thank you so much. Thank you for staying with us. This is After 4, and we still have over 200 guests online. So thank you very much. And of course, to my co-anchor, Moses, thank you for this. And it's been a pleasure talking to you all and doing this on behalf of the ICT committee. Finally, on behalf of the ICT committee, we'd like to thank you and we wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
for having us. Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr.